I believe that blessing follows obedience. From my very first job that I've ever had back in high school, when I worked at Burger King on North Street, home of the Whopper, my dad always taught me how to tithe off of my paycheck. And it's just something that I have always done, and it's a joy to give to the local church. Even in my career, I taught for 30 years up in the Fort Worth area. Every month, what I always did was the same. First thing I always did, off of the top, was write a check to the local church as my tithe and my offering. And I remembered that it wasn't just a ritual thing. I would actually pause when I had that check written, and I would thank God that I had a job and that I was able to give to His church. And then I always put aside some money in savings for rainy days and for emergencies. And then I started paying bills. And then what was left over, I always lived on every month. And for a while I taught piano lessons, especially back in the beginning of your education career. The money wasn't always so great. So the Lord blessed me, and I was able to teach piano lessons for like 10 years just to have some extra fun money. For almost the entire time that I lived in the Fort Worth area, my very best friend was Josh. I met Josh at church. He was 15 years younger than me. I was amazed that we hit it off so well. He was a preacher's kid, and even after he fell in love with Brandy and got married and began to have a family, our bond together was always so great. He was always the one that when I had to fill out an emergency contact, I'd always put his name down. He was the one that came to my rescue. He was always there for me. He dropped out of college at one time to start his own business of refinishing tubs and tiles in the Fort Worth area, and he was very successful. But I always razzed him a lot about not finishing his degree. So one day he told me, he said, "Well, guess what?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "I'm going back to college." And I don't know why I said what I said, what came out of my mouth next, but I told him, I said, "That's great. I want to go with you when you go and buy your books." Why did I want to go with him when he was going to buy his books? I don't know. But I was excited for him. And so sure enough, he registered for classes, and he called me and he said, "I'm finna go get my books." And I said, "Okay." What he didn't know was that in a time after that conversation, I felt led of God to go with him to buy his books. And the Lord really impressed me to buy his most expensive book. Not all the books, not help on tuition, but just to buy his most expensive book. And I remember thinking, okay, because I've always been a firm believer that blessing follows obedience. So I wanted to be obedient to the Lord. So I put my checkbook in my pocket, and he didn't know anything about this, and I went with him to the bookstore, and he had his list of classes, and the first book we picked up was an accounting book, and it cost $97. What? $97 for one book? I quickly said, "Oh, dear Lord, let this be the most expensive book." Well, as it turned out, it was. So as we got his books and we started toward the cash register, I took that book from him and I said, "Hey, I'm going to buy this book for you." And he was like, "No, you're not." And I said, "Yes, I am." And I said, "The Lord told me to buy this book for you, and I'm going to do it." Well, Josh was a Christian, and he knew not to argue with me. And so he said, "Okay." And he was very thankful. And I remember going up there and buying that book and writing a check for $105.18. And I remember getting back to my house going, "Lord, I got to make it the rest of this month." I'd already tithed, I'd already put back for savings, but I would sometimes run down almost to nothing before my next paycheck would come. And I was like, "Lord, this is an unexpected, expense, but I know that you'll take care of me." Well, about 3 days later, my sister, Lawana Smith, called me, and she said, hey, for Thanksgiving this year, my family's going to go to Paris, France. And we just so happen to have an extra ticket. The airfare is already paid for, and the hotel is already paid for, and we want to know if you'd like to go with us. Are you kidding me? Paris, France, for the price of food and souvenirs? Why, of course I wanted to go. We went. I had Thanksgiving dinner on the Eiffel Tower. They don't celebrate Thanksgiving, but yeah, I called it my Thanksgiving dinner. I saw the Mona Lisa. It's not as big as you think it is, but I remember enjoying a great, all expense practically paid trip to Paris, France. And I remember thinking to myself, blessing follows obedience. I wonder if I would have talked myself out of doing what God had asked me to do for my friend Josh. If this opportunity would have happened, I think that the Lord blessed me because I was obedient to what He asked me to do. And the interesting thing is, when the paycheck came that month, I still had over $100 left in my bank account, which was a rarity at the beginning of my school teaching career especially. And I thought, you know what, not only did God ask me to give some money, I did, and it was like He helped me to make it so that I didn't have to change my way of life for that particular month. He really and truly blessed me. And all these years later, I used to beg Josh when he started his family. I said, if you have a little boy, please name him after me. Well, he did have a little boy, and he named it after him. But he had another little boy, and sure enough, they named him after me, Judson Mark. I believe that if God asks you to do something and you are obedient, that blessings will follow. I believe that you will be favored. I'm a firm believer in giving to the church, doing it with a joyful heart, and just watch how God will bless you all the days of your life. It's promised in His Word.